Hello and welcome to the July 25th edition of the RAD Application Live Q&A. My name is Will Wavy. I'll be your host today. The purpose of this time is to help you answer questions related to submitting successful RAD applications. Just want to take a second to introduce you to our guest hosts today. I'm not sure if Greg Byrne will be joining. He'll be calling in from afar, but hopefully he'll be joining for some portion. Also joined by Pat Costigan, advisor in the Secretary's Office, Kathleen Foster, who's a contractor working with us on the RAD team, and Vicki Longos with HUD's Office of General Counsel. And Pat, Kathleen, and Vicki are joining us today because of today's special topic on finding and securing consulting help, since they have many, many valuable years of experience. So today we're going to quickly just give an update on CHAP awards, give you a reminder of where resources for RAD are available, then discuss the topic of the week, finding partners and building capacity. And the bulk of the time will just be answering your questions live here on this program. The first set of questions hopefully will be pertinent to our presentation on finding partners and building capacity, but then we're happy to go in whatever direction you want in terms of your questions. Quickly, just to start, some instructions and housekeeping. Using GoToMeeting, if you want to ask questions, raise your hand by clicking on the hand icon, and we'll unmute your line so you can ask your question live. Remember that if you do this, in order to do this, you must call into the dial number shown on your attendee control panel and input the audio pin shown. Otherwise, it won't work. You can also type in a question on the same panel, or you can send in questions to rad@hud.gov, which we'll be checking live to answer as well. So as of September 11, 2013, which is the last time we pulled this data, we've awarded 132 commitments to enter into HAPS, which represents 14,781 units. Just a reminder that we have currently we're statutorily capped at 60,000 units. For your internal purposes, an important deadline to keep in mind is that while we'll continue to accept applications for the full authorized term of the demonstration, which goes through fiscal year 2015, for any applications received before the end of this calendar year 2013, where you will honor the rents that are loaded into the RAD application, the RAD inventory assessment tool, which are based on 2012 appropriations. Speaking of the application and the inventory assessment tool, a reminder that they are available at the RAD website, www.hud.gov/rad. You pull down your application file by state, and then you can find your project in there by state for all public housing projects. In addition, we have some pre-recorded webcasts to walk you through completing an application. We have many FAQs from probably many of the same folks that are on the phone today, available on the RAD website as well as radresource.net. It's the same set of FAQs. And not on here, we've loaded, now on our website is also the webcast of the July 11th event, which covered an overview of changes in the RAD notice that we published earlier this month. Okay, so we're going to turn to today's topic, finding partners, building capacity. We get many versions of the same question from PHAs that we speak with at conferences and one-on-one on the phone, where they say, okay, I'm ready to go. I know I want to do RAD. I'm going to submit one or maybe multiple applications before the end of this calendar year, but my PHA doesn't have the capacity right now to figure it all out and get our applications in on time. We just don't have the staffing resources to do so. What steps should I take? What's the best approach to bring on board consulting help? What resources are available to connect me with the consulting community that's expertise in RAD? And what procurement rules apply when I'm doing this? So we're going to take the next few minutes talking through our advice on this topic. then turn to Q&A. Again, I ask that the first few questions at least be related to this topic, and then we can go on to other topics that you have on your mind. I'll start with just some preliminaries that if you're serious about RAD, make sure you've looked at the RAD notice, PIH Notice 2012-32, Revision 1, that you've checked out your property in the RAD Inventory Assessment Tool, which allows you to provide sort of a preliminary pro forma for any given property, and that you've looked at the Conversion Planning Guide, the RAD Conversion Planning Guide, which explains sort of how to think about RAD for your agency. All of these are available at the RAD website, www.hud.gov/rad. So with that, I'm going to turn to Kathleen, Pat, and Vicki to walk through the steps that they would take if they were an executive director of a public housing authority today, were ready to go on RAD but needed some help. Kathleen?
Okay, so I think the first thing you might want to consider is that you may want to secure a consultant. And the first thing to do before you secure a consultant is to decide on what your scope of work is. And I worked at a housing authority for 5 years, and I know that these new projects would come along, and we would always try to remind people that we all already had day jobs, and so it would be a good idea to hire an extra set of hands to be able to respond to some new initiatives. So again, we'd encourage you to think about securing a consultant, knowing that you have your hands full already with sort of the day-to-day operations of the housing authority. So your first decision is going to be, what should your scope of work be? And there's really three sort of general categories under the scope of work. The first thing you'll want is someone who can help you assess the feasibility of your public housing projects and a conversion under RAD. And they're going to build on work that you've already done. You will remain experts about your project. So they're going to build on what you've already done, what you already know about your project, what your projects need, either from your P&As or just by working with them every day in the field. So they're going to help you, usually by using the inventory tool, to assess what kinds of financing you might need to look at to be able to complete the renovations that need to be done prior to the conversion. And then there's a second set of work tasks that you may want help with, which is really deciding how to sequence the conversion process. So it's understanding, okay, which projects do I want to start with, knowing that I probably can't do them all at once with your current capabilities. Again, it's a huge amount of work to sort of take on. So which projects does it make sense to do first? Which projects should be next? Which projects should be last? And in particular, you want to look for somebody who's very familiar with the new rules on phasing projects. So you can now phase a project that needs, for example, 3 rounds of 9% tax credits to be accomplished. So you'll want to make sure they know those rules and understand how they work. And also the portfolio rules. How do I decide how to group my projects in portfolios, and how do I decide which ones I'm ready to come in with actual sources and uses information on now, and which ones I'd like to come in 12 months from now. So there's a lot of thought that goes into that process, and it's helpful to have somebody who can take sort of a broader view of everything in your portfolio and look at how sequencing is going to best work for you. And then there's really a third piece of work, which is flat out preparing the RAD application. A number of people I've worked with have actually used their own staff to do the RAD applications. It's pretty straightforward. Once you've already gone through the 2 processes that are described in number 1 and number 2, you've assessed the feasibility and you know what sequence you want to do them in. But again, if you don't have a lot of extra hands on board, certainly nothing wrong with using a consultant to go ahead and prepare the applications as well. We've had a number of people ask us for sample scopes of work, and we have a number of very good examples, and we are in the process of getting permission from the PHA to prepare those scopes of work to be able to make them generally available on the HUD website. So hopefully you'll start to see those come onto the website early next week sometime. So I've prepared a scope of work for a consultant. Now, what's my next step? How do I figure out who I should send the scope of work to, and how do I make a decision about the bid solicitation process? So first, the next step after scope of work is soliciting bids, and you're going to need to start with finding capable consultants. So how do I find consultants that know how to do this RAD work? First, you might talk with your peers. So you can look on the RAD website to see who else has applied for RAD and who might have a portfolio that looks something like yours. And talk to them about who they used as consultants. Are they satisfied? Are there different ways they would have structured their working relationship? I mean, just take advantage of the fact that there's already quite a few PHAs that have gone through this process. Secondarily, you could use as a resource a website that is at www.radcapitalmarketplace.com. And so this is a website. It is not a HUD-driven website. It's just a website that is out there and maintained by a couple of our investor partners as well as by CLAFA. And essentially, it's just an open marketplace where people who are interested in providing consulting help can put their names on that marketplace, and you can access them as a PHA. So you just go on, sign. It takes about 3 minutes to sign in your name and that you're the contact person for RAD at your agency, and then you can click on the consultant button and see who's out there that's doing consulting. Another really excellent way to do it is to call on people that have already been your partners in the past. You may have a consultant that you typically use to prepare tax credit applications or to do mixed finance proposals. Those folks are all coming up the learning curve on RAD, so certainly nothing wrong with starting with someone with whom you already have a relationship and, you know, soliciting bids from them as well. Okay, so then how do I pay for the consultants? The first way you can do it is to use non-federal funds. If you have non-federal funds at your agency, you can certainly use those to pay for consultants, and then your process for doing procurement is going to only be governed by whatever your state and local regulations are. If you want to use public housing funds to pay for consultants, you may do that. Typically, because you're allowed to use up to $100,000 without specific approval from HUD, you'll be following the small purchases procedures. And those are, as it says in the slide, at Chapter 5 of the Public Housing Procurement Handbook, which is at 7460.8 Rev 2. So then I think that Vicki and Pat are prepared to go through quickly some information on procurement and how you negotiate your way through those rules.
I think that's a great overview, Kathleen, and maybe at this time we'll let the questions come in and guide us on whether we want to talk about how I procure a consultant or perhaps a developer or what have you. Let's hear from you. I think now it's time to turn to you all and let your questions come in. So if we could make that happen, Will and Leanne, that would be great.
Sure. Do you want me to talk until some come in? I don't know how quickly they come.
Yeah, so let's see if there are any folks who've raised their hands on the GoToMeeting panel. Anyone yet?
All right, Vicki, I know one of the things that comes up quite a bit, and Kathleen outlined how we would approach, you know, a procurement under $100,000. But could you just refresh folks on the small business procurement rules and how that works? And the other thing that I think I've at least learned is that there are those rules, but there's also a housing authority level that guides procurement practices. Could be state-driven, could be authority-driven, and maybe it'd be good to just kind of walk through on your experience what folks need to be most familiar with in thinking about this kind of procurement.
Okay. So the first premise is if you're paying for the consultant or these other services that you're going to procure, Part 85 applies. And if you're intending that the services will probably cost, based on your cost estimates, you have to do a cost analysis for any procurement. Less than $100,000, that's considered a small purchase procedure. That's 24 CFR 85.D1. The HUD handbook explains the general course is get 3 quotes. You can do that by phone. You can do it based on your previous experience, but document it in your files, and then go ahead and enter into an agreement. It's a very simple simplified method. If you were not going to use public housing grant funds, let's say your COCC funds, then we've talked about follow your state and local law. State and local law still applies in your Part 85 procurements, and sometimes there are lower thresholds. So the federal threshold has to be honored. But let's say you have a $50,000 threshold for small purchases, then you need to abide by your state and local law on that. The other thing that you could possibly do, Kathleen said, you may already have some contacts from your mixed finance work. You may have entered into joint ventures. You may have affiliates, which may be other good vehicles for you to work with. And certainly if you enter into a joint venture under HUD's regulations at 963, then the activities that are then performed by that joint venture are not subject to Part 85. Just like if you'd entered into an agreement with your developer, and then your developer gets into procurement. Even though it might be on your behalf, it's going through their procedures. So they'll follow state and local laws, but 85 won't apply any longer. Another idea I had, perhaps, is intergovernmental agreements, to the extent that maybe a couple of PHAs want to cooperatively work on these, share experience, share costs. Or if, say, maybe they have large city development programs they want to tap into to get good consulting advice. That's another vehicle, and that is subject to 85. You go through sort of the same kind of Part 85 procedures on an intergovernmental agreement.
Okay, that's a great overview. Do we have some questions, Leanne? Looks like we do. Let's go to those.
Question from John Harmon.
John, you're on the line. You want to
yes. Yes, I wanted to know about the need for a comprehensive needs assessment in the RAD process. At what point would one introduce that? And if you have an existing one, how old can it be?
Yeah, so this is a question outside of, not a procurement question, just about the RAD physical conditions assessment. Under RAD, after an application is approved, we award a commitment to enter into a CHAP, and the CHAP says that after 90 days you need to produce a RAD physical conditions assessment consistent with the scope of work that we have on our website. If you've got a really fresh physical conditions assessment already, and it's consistent with the scope of work, you may be able to just submit that. In more likelihood, you may need to have that PCA revised or updated to bring it up to the standard required for the RAD physical conditions assessment.
Okay, so what do you mean by really fresh or current?
I think within 6 months.
Oh, okay. So we would have to do a new one then. That was my question.
Okay. Got another question. Let's see.
Janice Kimmel.
Janice, you're on the air.
I didn't have a question. Sorry.
Okay. It's okay.
John Hart.
John Hart, you're on.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. My question is, we are a PHA that currently does not have any units but have replacement housing funds. Is there a way that I can convert my replacement housing funds to RAD?
The only way you could do that would be first to build public housing with your replacement housing funds and then convert them.
Our current authority says we can only convert existing public housing units. So you have to have something built first before it can be converted.
Or go acquire them. You could go acquire them, follow a development method under 941, acquisition, you could do quickly.
Okay. So if I have them in the development phase, can I then apply for a RAD?
They must be ready to be occupied.
Okay. So I have to take them all the way up to occupancy.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
Okay, looks like there's no other questions. Oh,
Nope, here they come.
Ryan Duran.
Ryan, you're on the air.
Hello, I'm calling from the Omaha Housing Authority, and my question is basically we're looking at the possibility of converting 3 different towers. How would that work with the procurement process? You said $100,000. Is that so? Can I take? Is that a total of $300,000, or is that $100,000 for all 3?
Well, it's basically per contract.
Right. And let's be clear, Vicki, I don't mean to interrupt, but that's not the limit of what you can do on a pre-development level. That's sort of you don't really have to consult with HUD relative to procuring under that $100,000 threshold. You may need to go to 150, 200 per property. That's perfectly fine. It's just we're not going to ask you to get terribly involved with us until you go over $100,000.
Right. Yeah, it's sort of like what we do in allowing pre-development costs for regular public housing development, but, each one of those towers may have, specific needs. And so you could enter into, if you wanted, 3 separate consulting contracts. Although, HUD does not like to see avoidance of the competitive process by going out and doing a serial number of small purchases.
Right. So let me ask you this, Vicki, and not fully appreciating, Ryan, what you're up against, but 3 different towers. Might you let a contract under $100,000? Somebody could work on all 3, knowing full well that down the line there will be more needs, and you could let another contract at another time post-closing or as warranted. Is that a fair approach?
Sure, you can do that. And I guess the other thing that you can do in your contract, is that you can allow for amendments.
Well, there you go.
Up to about 20%.
Okay, that's a good approach. Does that help, Ryan?
It does, yeah. Thank you.
Mark Straub, you're on.
Hello. Easy question. You're talking about the procurement and the statement of work for a consultant. The question is after you've been awarded a CHAD, would you have a statement of work or recommend a statement of work for the follow-on administration that would occur over the next to accomplish the milestones and allow for continuity to continue with that consultant, or would you recommend handling that?
So we don't yet. In fact, we don't even have the statement of work for the initial consultant up yet. We hope to in the next few days. That's something we can look out for. Certainly, some of your housing authority peers have secured consultants to help them through the entire process, to actually guide them through the milestones. Many housing authorities are doing that in-house with staff. I'm sure there are housing authorities out there that have statements of work that are willing to share them, and to the extent that we come across them and there's something we can post to our website, we will.
And if any of you want to raise your hand, get in the queue, and offer to respond to that directly, we'll put you on the air, and you two can sort of share quick information. We're happy to do that, but we want to get to the other questions too. So, do we have another one, Leanne?
Yeah, Elaine Miller.
Hi,
oh, yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, hi. My question is, I have 70 units currently under a rent stop that is expiring. That's triggered our eligibility to be part of the RAD conversion. I have another 115 units that are just market rate. They don't have any kind of subsidy on them, and I was hoping to roll it into that. I found out today, and this is conflicting information that I had gotten prior to this, that because we're not doing a refi, they are not eligible. Only the 70 that are under a current rent sub contract.
Yeah, I think that sounds correct. We certainly can review that. I don't know where you got the initial information. We'd be happy to verify it. I don't believe that our Layla Bozorg, who is sort of on point for the second component, rents up wrap transactions, is with us on the call.
No, she actually did give me that information that they were not eligible.
Yeah, well, if you got that information from Layla, that's why we're sitting here nodding our heads that sounds right to us.
Okay. I just wanted to verify, because if there's any chance I could get them in there, I obviously want to.
It's a great time to refinance, though. You might think about that.
Well, you know, unfortunately, we just did. We just revamped the whole building not like 3 years ago, so it's probably not really a good idea for us right now.
Okay. Well, good luck there.
Oh, thank you.
Linda, hello.
Hi, how are you? Can we use a public housing development grant that was awarded to us as part of a RAD application or conversion? Or
could you be more specific as to what grant you're considering to use?
Yeah,
and what you were going to use it for?
The initials of it are PDEV, and the verbiage is Public Housing Development Grant.
Okay.
And we were awarded it to build new units. We have an obligation deadline of September next year, and I was wondering if we can use it towards either hiring a consultant and or putting it toward capital needs of existing units to help a project balance out.
Okay. Linda, it depends. I'm very familiar with the old PDEV money and the old MROP money. It really depends what your ACC said. In some cases, you could use it for modernization and rehab. Some cases, it would say that you were going to develop a certain number of public housing units. Some cases, it limits your TDC, and then overall, you're limited to stay underneath your FAIR clause. Had you been reviewed by our PDEV panel on this particular grant?
As far as I know, I do have a letter from our from HUD saying that we can use it for 3 additional units.
Okay.
That's the latest thing I know about it.
Okay. Yeah, it was probably something. I mean, I reviewed all of those to make decisions about, you know, how many more units they could add and that sort of thing. If you wouldn't mind, I would like you to work with Jeff Riddell and myself on this one because it has to be used for public housing, okay, whether it's development or capital. And then if you need to use some of it for consultants related to that part of it, developing the public housing. It's sort of like the question we had before with the RHF. Will help you develop the public housing, then it could become RAD properties, but it has to be available for occupancy before we can convert it.
Okay, then we can talk about it further.
Yeah, let's just be very specific. I want to make sure I understand what the terms were of your grant.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Linda, after this call, you can just send me a note on it, and I'll connect you with Vicki and Jeff, okay?
Okay, thanks.
John, back on the line. John, you there? Okay, go to the next one.
James O.
Hello?
Hey, James. Yes.
Hi, how are you? Is this Will?
Yes.
Hi, yeah, I'm from NYCHA. We actually spoke, I think maybe last week or a couple weeks ago. But I had a question specifically about Section 18.
Okay.
And if what are the requirements as it relates to notifying the residents and getting their consent to convert their unit to project-based or project-based rental assistance?
Now, yeah, let's make sure, is this a Section 18 question or is this a RAD question? In other words, pursuing RAD, you have a different set of procedures for that conversion. if you're talking about actually seeking a Section 18 demo dispo approval through our SAC, our Special Application Center, that's a different procedure. That's not required under a RAD conversion.
So are you saying, just to be clear, that we do or do not need to engage the residents?
So that's a different question. The question about whether Section 18 applies is no, the RAD process has its own process for if you're disposing an asset to a purpose of tax credits or if you're demolishing and rebuilding a site. In terms of resident engagement, under RAD, before submitting an application, you need to hold 2 meetings with residents.
Okay.
Collect comments, provide them feedback to comments, and submit sort of a summary of comments and your responses in your application. And then following approval, you'll have to have a follow-up meeting with residents.
And then maybe you want to mention about the significant amendment.
Right. Yep. And thank you, Vicki. Vicki reminded me that also as part of following approval, you'll need to amend your do a significant amendment to your annual plan, which involves a resident process.
Public hearing.
Yeah, that's a great actually point, Vicki. So we actually just did our annual plan yesterday, actually, hearing.
Oh.
And how does this work? Because we plan to submit, I believe, we're targeting October for a RAD submission. So how would that play out as far as amending the annual plan?
Well, what is the definition of a significant amendment in your annual plan? And
that I would, yeah, I would have to find.
That's the first big question because that's really up to you. The second
okay.
thing is, what did you say in your public meeting?
Right. Yeah, I would have to get back to you on that. I wasn't able to attend.
Okay.
But okay. I mean, that's a great point that I need to get back to our folks on is, you know, the amendment to the annual plan, though.
Yeah, we've done some Q&A advice relating to annual plans and given you some suggestions on the type of significant amendment language you want to incorporate into your plan process.
I think that's available on our FAQ page.
Okay, good.
Okay. But so just to be clear, you said that under the RAD program, we would be exempt from doing some sort of Section 18, and in lieu of that, we would need to hold 2 meetings with the residents, get their comments, and what was the second thing that you mentioned?
And then submit a summary of those comments and your responses with your application, with your actual RAD application to HUD.
Got it. Right, the summary of comments. Is there any minimum requirement as far as like how many pages it is, or I don't know. I mean, what's the? It's
just based on what you get.
Okay.
If everyone says that it's fantastic and they can't wait, then it sounds like it should be a pretty brief submission.
Okay. And what if the residents are against it? What kind of approvals? What kind of approvals do we need as we, pursue this RAD application? Do we need city, state, and both the city and state approvals as well?
No. This is Pat Costigan, the Secretary's office. You don't need those, but I mean the question of resident support is a very good one. These are the minimum requirements in the application, but frankly, we have found that housing authorities that sit down and work through with residents what the objectives are and what will change, what will stay the same, how things can be better, spend the time, do that, have gotten pretty good support from residents. We've actually had a lot of contact with your resident council presidents up your way. And we'd certainly be happy to be helpful to the extent that we can. But I think the path forward there is to really focus on building the resident support. This won't be a question of, how many are for and how many are against, but we will look for residents to be generally supportive and understanding of what you're trying to do. Same time, we appreciate you have a lot on different burners up there, and you have some questions and controversies going on. Try to separate those out and focus on what RAD can do for the residents, and we think that that can be a winning hand for most housing authorities.
Yeah, I think.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, Pat, please don't get me wrong here. We're actively we're working diligently to put in our application. We just want to make sure that we do it the right way and do it according to the way you want us to present the information and communicate that to the residents. So thank you for that.
Sounds like you're on the right path.
Yeah, I think the key thing, so residents know what their options are.
That's right.
You know, do they have the right to remain? Do they have, you know, other possibilities of public housing, those sorts of things?
Right.
They need to outline the relocation.
And we have some modest materials, and we'll have more shortly on our RAD webpage about resident questions, basic issues. The Low-Income Housing Coalition has been a great resource. There are other great resources, frankly, up your way that have been willing to be helpful on this and worked along with us over the last few years to put this on the table as an option. And I'll bet you could call on some help up that way and you know, get questions answered that residents may have.
Right. And then, you know, just one last thing. So as it relates to RAD, do you know if, oh gosh, I've lost it now, but I had a question about actually, about as far as rehab is concerned, is it required that it be tenant-in-place rehab, or can the residents be temporary, dislocated, you know, relocated?
Generally, I
somewhere?
defer to the more talented and in-depth experts in the room, but that one I'll take. It's the best way you can do it. Certainly, it's more accommodating to your residents to try to work with them in place.
Sure.
And to the extent that you can make that happen, great. The extent that temporary relocation is warranted, the residents usually understand that. If anything like, you know, my family, when we went through construction, we didn't want to be anywhere near it. So I think it's just a matter of what you work through with your residents and explain to them.
And it can be before you convert or after you convert.
There you go.
Okay. Okay. And then just last question, going back to the resident engagement piece and holding 2 meetings, is there any, you know, do we need to get, let's say it's a 1,000-unit building, or let's forget about 1,000 units. Let's say there's 1,000 residents at one property or development. Do we need to get at least, you know, 51% consensus, or is there any requirement on that end for a RAD application?
Make a good effort to, you know, that the residents are all aware of this, get the information out, you know, in the ways that you found most effective to communicate with your residents, and that'll do fine. You know, a common courtesy is a couple weeks' notice for anyone's schedule, and if you do all that, then I think you'll be good.
Okay. 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 Yeah, that's very helpful because, yeah, so what you're saying basically is we just need to show we did this in good faith and did our best efforts to do that. Okay. Okay. That's all I have for questions. Thank you.
Thanks, James. Okay, one from in-house, Cheryl Tenninga.
Never mind, I was going to try to answer something, but it's covered.
Oh, thank you, Cheryl. Cheryl, if you want, if we're in 3110, if you want to come join us.
Okay, thanks.
Next, Joe Schiff. Joe, hello.
Thank you. I just wanted to make a comment, if I could, please, to the guy, particularly the guy from NYCHA. I have found that in all of my consulting that I have not found any tenant objections to this, except for the fact that you need to recognize that when you go from public housing to either PBV or PBRA, there are no flat rents. So it depends on how many flat rent payers you have as to potential levels of opposition. And I think that's an important analysis for any housing authority to do, and I don't know where NYCHA stands now on the percentage of residents that have flat rents. But I think you should look at that.
Good, helpful advice, Joe. I know you've been out there doing a lot of this, that we encourage those of you to share those kind of experiences and tips with other housing authorities. That's exactly what we hope these calls can do, is promote some discussion among all of us that are trying to do this, and we'll try to make the connections as best as possible, but we appreciate that, Joe.
Thanks.
Gregory, hello.
So, The authority recently completed the installation of energy improvements under an add-on subsidy EPC. What effect does it have on being able to convert to RAD?
So have you just entered into an energy performance contract, or you're close or considering doing so?
We've completed it, and we are into the first year of repayment.
So number of housing authorities that we're working with now have submitted projects that have an EPC on them. Generally, they're choosing to convert that property because there's debt associated with that site. They either through conversion would need to continue to service the debt if the lender is okay with that, and if any new financing sources are okay with that source continuing to be paid, or more likely, or what we're seeing more frequently, is that PHA is paying off a portion of the principal on the EPC loan. So it does not. It's not a but to the extent that it adds to your transaction cost because there's an additional piece to pay off, that's something to consider. Vicki, anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes we have to sort it out. I mean, if they were to take all of the EPC part of the RAD, then that's easy. But sometimes we see splitting where they want to keep an EPC in place for some public housing, and and how do you deal with that? And that's probably a prepayment. But we have found, like when we had our last conference, a lot of the ESCOs were in the room, and seemed to be very interested and flexible in trying to work out some modifications of the loan documents.
And we're certainly interested in trying to figure out how to get them to work together, and we are working on that internally, and we'll have some more thoughts on that as we go forward. So we encourage those of you that have EPCs, are working on EPCs, have RAD, are working on RAD, to bring that back to us, and we'll try to think out loud with you and give the best guidance we can, even if we can't say precisely today what we think might be the best.
And we're probably in the best position to help you on the remaining subsidy that you can continue if you're going to keep some of it in public housing. If you have this add-on subsidy, we want to do some recalculations, but make sure that you have enough to cover your debt.
Gregory, can you tell us which housing authority you're with?
The Greenwood Housing Authority in Mississippi.
Which one? I'm sorry.
The Greenwood Housing Authority in Mississippi.
Okay. We'll, as Pat said, we're working through some of more of these issues, and as we sort them out and have additional guidance, we may reach out to you.
I appreciate it.
Sure.
John Harmon
is back.
John.
Yes. Yeah. Hello. Yeah, I had my phone on mute before. Okay. My question was also on DISPO. We have 24 scattered sites that we acquired some years ago and find they cost quite a bit more to run than our regular public housing. So in the interest of streamlining and bringing up that capital, we wanted to do a DISPO on those. So I understood what you said about Section 18 not applying per se. We would, of course, have relocation responsibilities, which would have to be part of the RAD budget, I would assume.
Yes.
But my question is more specifically about how long do we have to do the DISPO and then reinvest the proceeds from those units into another housing development?
So if you, let me be clear. So if you've got 24 scattered site public housing units and you want to convert them through RAD, when you convert them through RAD, the whole point is that they'll be replaced somewhere else. There's what's basically a one-for-one replacement requirement under RAD with some minor exceptions. It wouldn't just be a free and clear disposition of these 24 units.
We understand that.
Okay.
Yeah, we would plan on doing a new tax credit project to replace that housing.
and putting these 24 units there. So what you're
well, at least 24.
24 minimum. Yeah. Okay. We're with you.
Yeah.
So what we're talking about there is a transfer of assistance. You'll be converting these 24 units and transferring the units into the tax credit. And first of all, to do so, you have to meet one of our threshold tests for reasons to transfer assistance, and those you'll find in the RAD notice. But then we'll provide you a CHAP. Your application will demonstrate the proposed financing on the tax credit site. We'll provide you a CHAP for those 24 units, or at least 24 units, however many you decide, that will eventually go into that new tax credit site. And you'll be putting together your financing plan to submit to us around that tax credit site.
Right. So how long would we have to reinvest those proceeds in the tax credit project?
So okay. So you're, once you convert the units and move them over, you sell the 24 units, which you want to put towards the development sources of the tax credit site.
Yes, yeah. So we're just wondering, is there a time limit on when we use the proceeds from the sale as part of that tax credit process? You know, it can take a while to assemble the resources to do a tax credit project.
Right. So
with lenders and
the CHAP will be your main guide in pushing you to complete the financing as quickly as possible. If you're relying on 9% tax, generally RAD conversions close within 365 days. Sometimes it's a little longer if you show us that you have to wait 4 months before you can submit your 9% tax credit application. But then the CHAP milestones will sort of lead you towards submitting a financing plan to us, firming up your commitments from your lenders and investors, and proceeding to closing. One of the important closing steps is having the disposition proceeds of the 24 units in hand, presuming you're planning to put those into the site. So basically, at the end of the day, you'll have 365 days or a little longer if the tax credits take longer to secure for applying for that first round, to put all of your financing sources together.
And John, to be clear, there's not a requirement that you put those disposition proceeds into the financing structure. It sounds like you need to do that. I'm also sitting here thinking that could be bridged. That could be an opportunity for a third party to say, well, we understand the actual sale of these units will take longer. The proceeds coming back in may be a year, 18 months down the road. But that's an excellent opportunity for a bridge loan request to an intermediary that maybe you've worked with in the past that could recognize that. And, you probably know who Doris Koo is in Enterprise, and go make a deal.
yeah, right. Yeah, that's exactly what we're thinking. We would, but that's a good idea on bridging that. We've done bridge loans before. All right, thank you.
So we don't have any more hands raised right now. Is there a written question?
Yeah. We've got one from Debbie, who asked, with sequestration, is there a possibility that the vouchers would at any point not be funded?
Okay, so we get these questions sometimes as well.
Did everybody hear the question?
Sure. The question is, with sequestration, is there a risk that the vouchers will not be funded? So this year, in 2013, there was a sequestration on appropriations, 5% across the board, and as a result, those of you with voucher programs saw your overall voucher HAP decrease. And just like any other HUD program, this is the Section 8 accounts are subject to appropriations. And the difference is just where you perceive the appropriations risk, like the public housing program or in the Section 8 program. So the short answer is yes. If in the future there are deep budget cuts and your voucher HAP is prorated, then you'll get less voucher funds. And you'll do what you've had to do today, which is, in many cases, not lease new vouchers, not put new vouchers on the street, and in some extreme cases actually have to take vouchers away. But that doesn't mean it's different from how it works in public housing, where if there's a proration of 92%, then every project gets 92%. In vouchers, your overall voucher budget would be prorated, and it's your decision of how to manage that budget and where to make cuts.
And in that situation, you would have let presumably a 15-year or possibly a 20-year PBV contract. And so you would be basically under contract to provide funding to whatever set of partners you might have in that development. And so you, as the housing authority, would have to say, well, I have a contractual obligation here. I have a demand in my community to fund more vouchers. You'll have to weigh what you need to do, but most housing authorities feel that they have to honor the contractual obligations before making a choice about doing additional vouchers in their community. So it really does kind of come back to you letting the contract and honoring the contract in a very unfortunate situation with less voucher funding to work with, and we appreciate that. There will be a lender and investor evaluation of that appropriations risk. And we today have found that project-based vouchers and project-based rental assistance in the minds of lenders and investors have less appropriations risk than the annual funding of public housing capital and operating funds, which many of you use in mixed finance transactions. But that's all a risk calculation about what the Congress might do, and that's a very tough crystal ball to see in and be able to predict anything right now, other than I do think that the Congress understands that when a long-term contract is let, that there are severe implications and problems if the funding for those contracts cannot be continued.
We've got another question from Margaret Donnelly. She wrote in on sequencing applications. She asked if you're submitting an application for 4 or 5 properties as part of her portfolio RAD proposal, and you phase the RAD conversion over a 3 to 5 year process in order to obtain the tax credits.
Okay, so I'll repeat the question Margaret Donnelly asked. You're submitting a portfolio award for how many properties? 4 or 5? She says, can you sequence it over 3 to 5 years because you're applying for tax credits? So, Margaret, you've hit upon a somewhat complicated topic to talk through, where you're touching on 2 things that we introduced in the most recent RAD notice. The first is a portfolio award. Under a portfolio award, the PHA can submit an application for a portfolio of properties, let's say 5, and what we expect is half the applications come in now, and the rest come in within 365 days. When an application comes in, we take 30 days to approve it, we issue a chap, and then you have 365 days to close, or sometimes a little bit longer if you're waiting for a tax credit cycle round. So your first batch of properties would have to come to close in that time period, and then your second batch of properties, you'd submit applications within 365 days, so presumably let's say you wait a year, and then the same clock starts ticking. That within a year of submitting that, or getting your application approved, I should say, those additional applications approved, you have to meet milestones and close within a year. And again, sometimes a little bit longer if you're doing tax credits. Now you're also saying, well, let's say there's one of those sites is a larger site that you want to redevelop with 9% tax credits, and it's going to require 3 rounds of tax credits in order to rebuild all the units. And so built into that portfolio award, in a sense, is you would submit this multi-phase project. For that project, you'd submit an application for the first phase, and for the remaining phases, they would need the applications for the remaining phases would need to be submitted over the next 2 years. The last one being received by July 1st of 2015. Marrying those two concepts, again, you've got 5 properties today. One of them is going to require, I'm making this up, but if you want to add some more information, raise your hand and we can talk. If you've got 5 properties today, one of them is going to require multi-phase redevelopment. Then submit that as one of your projects today in your portfolio award, one of your applications today, and that can go forward through the multi-phase award, where you submit phase 1 today, and you've got a couple of years to submit the applications for the remaining phases, and that should buy you enough time to apply to 3 and possibly 4 rounds of tax credits in your state, depending on your state, of course.
Yeah, this is a bit of a sort of a chessboard play, really, to think about what you can do here. But we'll, as you walk through that possibility, I heard 3 tax credit rounds, 13, well, possibly 4 if you could still get something in 13. But let's just say 3 in 14, in 15, and you could also in 16 potentially qualify. Had you submitted that application at the end of 15, you would have another 365 days. So you really have to sit and sort of plot it out on a piece of paper and sort of think about that relative to your QAP rounds. That applies for 9% credits. Of course, if you're doing bond 4% credits, those usually aren't once a year. They're usually generally available or allocated multiple times a year. So we would look at that relative to what goes on in your state. So it will be different in every state relative to your QAP and your allocation periods.
We've got another written question from Lucius Cameron. He is asking about scattered sites. If a PHA is planning to consolidate units on 2 new or existing sites from 5 scattered sites, can we get a RAD award on the existing units, then work out the development aspects after the award?
Okay. So Lucius asks, he's got sounds like 5 scattered sites, and he wants to consolidate the units onto 2 sites. It sounds pretty sort of high-level conceptual right now, but it doesn't all have it fully planned out, but has this basic idea, and that knows that he wants to proceed with this. So there's one of 2 approaches. If he knows how it's going to work out, and the future site of these assisted units, he can submit RAD applications for these units and explain the development that's going to go on at the new sites. Alternatively, if he only knows that for sure he wants to convert these units, and he knows he wants to put them somewhere, but he needs a little bit more time to plan out where exactly they're going to go and what that's going to look like, we'd be willing to entertain building into his chat milestones a couple of months for him to sort that out, for him to say, I will have the site selected within 2 months, and then the rest of the milestones will begin after that. And the rest of the milestones being, if it's an existing site, performing a PCA, submitting a financing plan, and if it's just new development, then the biggest milestone is going to be getting the tax credits and submitting the financing plan. So I think that answers that. Any callers have live questions? Okay. Any more written questions? Yeah.
Another written question from Robert Beal. He asked, in a multi-phase award, how are the contract rents going to be determined on the later phases?
Sure. So the question was, for a multi-phased award, how will the contract rents be determined for the later phases? So we said in the notice that any applications received in calendar year 2012, we would honor the in calendar year 2013, we would honor the rents that were posted in the application and the tool. If you submit to us a portfolio award or a multi-phase award application or just a single application, for all of those, for all units and projects involved in any of those applications, this year we'll honor the 2012 rents. Okay, do other folks have questions that they want to ask live? Those are more fun. Okay, if there are no more questions, we'll wrap up in just a minute or so. Give folks a few more seconds to formulate a question, a last-ditch effort.
While we're waiting for that, let me just throw out one thing. Kathleen mentioned earlier at the top, and we have a slide somewhere that talks about radcapitalmarketplace.com, which is a website that you can go to and find information about lenders and investors and advisors and consultants and P&A providers, etc. We are in the process of working with those third parties who have been hosting this, and many have found it very helpful in providing more detailed information, breaking it down by region, by specialty, etc., to make some things more clear. One of the things that we're looking into is being able to have it link into your interest in particular. So if you're a housing authority and you want to put out a RFQ for a consultant, it would be, we're looking into this, you can't do it today, but we're working on it. We'd be interested in getting some feedback. We'd be potentially willing, if that's of interest to you, to feature your link back to your web page and say, here, I have a RFQ, I'm looking for a development consultant or potentially a development partner, or I need a P&A provider that I can talk to and understand what's involved in P&A. So potentially we could offer that. We're also looking at different ways to suggest the range of experience that various consultants, advisors, law firms, etc. have in the public housing development space, if you will. With RAD certainly, but there are a number of very good and capable advisor, consultants, law firms, etc. out there that have worked in mixed finance, Hope 6, other more complex public housing transactions, and it's in everyone's interest to share that information. So all to say is that we would urge you to take a look at this, radcapitalmarketplace.com. See if you think it might be a helpful tool to you. Send your suggestions on what can be done about that to rad@hud.gov, and we'll certainly take those suggestions into account. We're working really as we speak on trying to find a way to make that a forum, frankly, for all of you, public housing authorities, lenders, investors, advisors, consultants that might be on the call. You suggest to us what we might be able to do there to make that more user-friendly for you. We'll certainly take that into account. That is not to say that that is any way an exclusive place. There are other ideas. I know that CLAFA and FADA and NARO have traditionally been a good forum for sharing information, and that's another recommendation that we would make, is to check with your associations that you may be a part of in getting information about who's good in this space as you seek development partners. We know particularly that the NARO regional affiliates really work hard at communicating within their regions and sharing information, and so we think that that can be a good place, as well as checking in with FADA and CLAFA, many of whom run in their newsletters ideas and suggestions on this level. So we're basically very interested in getting your thoughts on what HUD might do, what others might do in facilitating the information sharing to help people get the help that they need. So send that on. We'll do what we can to respond and address that directly or share that with others in the industry who are very interested in trying to be helpful as well. So we just encourage you to do that. I think in filling that space, Leanne, we got a couple more questions. So I'll take that as let's turn to the questions, Pat.
Great. Jonathan Laser, he's been trying to connect for a while. Jonathan, are you there?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yes.
We hear you.
All right, wonderful. Now, what happens if a CNI RAD application does not receive a CNI award? Does it still continue as a RAD?
Right. So you would be applying, just to kind of walk back through this, you would be applying for a choice implementation grant in this award. And what we have said is if you choose to do that, there is a box in the choice application that basically says, as part of my choice application, I would like to be considered for RAD approval. We automatically take that choice implementation application. If you were awarded, we would take that as your RAD application. So you would automatically be in there. So the question is, what happens if I'm not awarded that choice implementation grant? Have I made a RAD application? The short answer to that is no, you have not. And so that raises the question, well, is there a way for me to sort of play both ends of the middle? And the answer to that is yes, there is. If there is a way for you to submit a viable RAD application now, meaning your financing plan would have to work within 6 months. In other words, you could not show a $20 million gap in your financing plan that was dependent upon you getting the Choice Neighborhoods Implementation Award. Not that I'm saying the awards are going to be $20 million this year. We don't know that yet. But just by way of example. So you would have to submit, and it would certainly be in your interest and a good move for you if you feel that you can submit a viable RAD application, one where you could complete a financing plan within the indicated time period, roughly 6 months, demonstrating that you have sufficient sources to meet your uses. Now, I just answered this question earlier today, and that's why I'm going on about it a little bit. One of the things that some housing authorities are considering, there is a way for me to begin my work on a Choice Neighborhoods proposal on one of the properties or one of the amps or split an amp and begin partial work on a property that could work under RAD now. And then if you were to be awarded a Choice implementation grant, you could turn to the more complex part of the property or properties that you would be seeking to redevelop and do choice. So there's a number of ways to stage to this that you should sort of think through a little bit. But the bottom line is when you submit a RAD application, it's going to have to demonstrate viability, and it will be hard for us to sort of work with that with a $20 million gap in it. Hope I answered that question for you.
Yeah, you did. Excellent. And now, so would the RAD award date be based on the CNI award schedule?
In terms of when we would review your RAD application and make a judgment on giving you a initial CHAP award, they will be, if you're submitting a RAD application, it will be independently reviewed and judged. If you're submitting a choice application, the deadline, I believe, is sometime this fall. I don't recall off the top of my head. You probably know it. So we would, again, that would be relative to your choice application, and so that would be an independent process, though if you were awarded an implementation grant, we wouldn't make you come back around and submit a RAD application. We would just work on that. But look, the truth of the matter is there are only going to be 4 or 5, half dozen choice awards, so we would be able to, at that time, sit down and work with you to adjust your application, make sure. And we will also make sure that there's sufficient RAD authority available at that time. If that becomes an issue, we'll make sure that we set aside sufficient authority for those choice awardees indicating that they would like to pursue RAD. We'll make sure that happens.
Excellent. Thank you.
John Harmon.
John, this is your 3rd or 4th bite at the apple. What do you got for us?
It's only the 3rd. Yes, I'm trying to visualize the PBRA scenario, how that works in operation, and I think I know some of the answers, but I want to confirm some of these also if I could. will be under Section 8 project-based rules, which we're already familiar with. We already have some contracts like that we administer. Now, we'll be using a contract administrator, I would also assume.
That's correct.
To monitor the subsidy and the physical condition of the project. But we also are going to have a big chunk of capital work that we'll be doing in conjunction with the RAD. So who will supervise or monitor that from the regulatory side?
And John, just to be clear, you would be doing that capital work over time as opposed to doing redevelopment over an initial construction period upon closing of your RAD conversion?
Well, I'm thinking initially we would probably do some of the more immediate needs on a capital basis when we did the RAD conversion, because we would have some reserves available, and perhaps that would be a condition that might emerge when our physical needs assessments are reviewed. Our inventory is in very good shape overall, but I'm sure there's a few things we might need to do.
So we're hearing you want to stage it. Will, you want to address that?
Yeah, sure. So you know, when we approve your financing plan, we'll give you a RAD conversion commitment, which will sort of memorialize what you told us in terms of when the work's going to be done, what amount of work is going to be done now, what amount of work is going to be funded from reserves and performed in the future. The escrow agent would be set up. Who would be the escrow agent? So you know, still needs to determine who would be the escrow agent to control, monitor the use of those funds. But you know, some of those details still need to be sorted out.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch that.
I'm sorry?
I didn't understand the last thing you said. It kind of got cut off.
Sure. So, some of the details, we still need to work out some of the details where there's no lender or tax credit investor involved in the deal, or PHA is funding it themselves. So who's controlling the escrow of funds put up for initial repairs and for ongoing repairs?
Yeah, I think we could assume we probably would have a tax credit investor involved, at least in most of our applications.
Then they will tell you what to do, as you well know, John, and that's the way that we conceive of this. You will have lenders and investors directing traffic, and there's no need for us to be a third or a fourth voice in that.
Thank you. That was really the root of my question.
Okay.
Because we're used to dealing with the lenders and the tax credit investors, and that's very familiar territory to us.
No, that's really the design.
We put the RAD layer on it.
That's absolutely the design of the program, where you're working with lenders and investors. They're going to have requirements. We know that. They're frankly going to have the ability to work with you in your particular area much more closely than any of us could do. So we're going to delegate effectively that role to them.
Okay, and then looking at this from an ongoing period, like we use our capital grant awards, where we're doing multiple phases with multiple years, one of the attractions to us is we can save up money in our reserves and then go through and do everything that a project needs at once instead of doing dribbles and drabs every year or two. So on those kind of needs situation, we would need approval from the contract administrator to withdraw reserves or not?
Probably so. We're, that's the typical way that PBRA contracts are administered. They would look at your reserves, and again, as Will said, we will take a good look up front to see that those reserves are sufficiently plussed up for what you're saying you're going to do over time. It would be up to them to then review and monitor that.
Yes, and so we realize we'll be accumulating reserves, probably a lot of it from the money that would have come from capital grant that's blended into that funding stream. But the existing reserves we have would go into that same pool, or would that be in a different fund?
Yeah, you could do a number of things with that. With existing operating reserves, that's on the project today. You could perform the initial. You could put that into the initial development work that you're doing, or you could put it into an initial deposit into the replacement reserve. And I'm sure there are a few other ways to structure it, but that's what we're seeing most often. That the people are using the $3,000 a unit or so that they've got in operating reserves and filling some development gaps, or loading it back into the project as a capital replacement reserve.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sure. Let's see, we've got Debbie, you're on the line.
Hi, I'm with the Harrington Housing Authority, and I was wondering on the physical needs assessment, is that the same, or can you use the green physical needs assessment, or are they two different things?
They're fairly different. It's a very good question. We've done some analysis here. They're sort of meant for different purposes, and they're fairly different. So the short answer is no. You should use the RAD PCA. If it's a project that's converting, that you're submitting an application for sometime this year, then you'll never have to, and presuming it comes to conversion, you'll never have to do the public housing green P&A on it. You'll be exempt from that requirement as long as it's participating in RAD. But if you're talking about a conversion that's a few years down the line, or an application, excuse me, that's a few years down the line, which I hope not. I hope you're working to submit earlier than that. Then some PCAs, some of the PCA providers have talked through with us how PHAs might write a scope of work where they say, how much to do the public housing green P&A, and then how much if I need to revise that to come into the sort of RAD compliance physical conditions assessment. But again, I'd recommend don't even worry about that because the rule for the green P&A is not out yet, so it's not a requirement yet. And if you're submitting a RAD application sometime over the next few months, then you'll be exempt from that requirement.
Okay, and then the other question I had was, does this in any way, if you are submitting application for conversions, affect the declarations of trust that we file every year when we receive our capital grant funds?
Yes, when you convert a property, the declaration of trust is removed.
And is replaced.
And it's replaced
with a use agreement.
RAD use agreement.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Sure.
Mark Straub.
Hey, Mark.
Yes. Hi. This goes back to Choice Neighborhoods implementation grant submission. And as I understand it from your description, we could check a box and basically apply for that development for RAD. Since we're submitting the application this year, I would assume our rents would be locked for that site. And since it's a multi-phase or anticipated to be a multi-phase project, that would be understood that would be part of the submission.
That's correct.
But it would not be a portfolio submission. So in order to qualify for some type of portfolio submission, we would need to submit a separate RAD application in accordance with the recent notice and submit that this year separately.
That's correct. It really would be wise to separate out whatever you intend to do in your choice implementation application from another approach under a portfolio application. I mean, I can sit here and conceive of how you could make a claim on that being a contingent part of a RAD portfolio award, meaning to be figured out next year. It probably would just be easier all the way around and make sure that you get in here while we have authority to submit those two concepts differently. They're very different. I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I certainly would recommend you think of it that way. There's no harm, no foul for you doing it in two separate moves. It's really no harder or easier.
I want to stress something that Pat said earlier, or when he was driving home, that a Choice Neighborhoods application is not a RAD application. Only a Choice Neighborhoods award will have counted as a RAD application. So you're not safe just having submitted a Choice Neighborhoods application. If you're thinking that you would do RAD whether or not you got, for a project, whether or not you get choice neighborhoods, then we'd recommend you also submit a RAD application or include it in a portfolio award where it's the later stage of portfolio application.
Yeah, that's a very good distinction.
I understand.
There.
Thank you.
Yep, good.
Jason Long.
Hey, Jason.
Oh, hi. Actually, this is Lucy Dew.
Oh, hey, Lucy.
Hi. I just wanted to, I guess, give a little comment on a question earlier about who on a PBRA who will be overseeing the replacement reserve releases. And I think that was the question. The contract administrator does not do that. It is done by HUD, and I think there was a delegation that is either in the works or has already been issued where some of that will be delegated to the lenders now. So the replacement reserve, monitoring, withdrawals, approvals, all of that is not done by the PBCA contract administrator, but rather by either the HUD office or the lender.
Thanks, Lucy. We'll check up on that. That's in some sense, and this just for folks' background, in some sense, some very non-legal sense, the contractors or PBRA, the performance-based contract administrators, are contractors of HUD, so they're acting on HUD's behalf. And in some cases, HUD itself is doing the administration. In some cases, the PBCA is doing the administration, but the effect is the same. It's considered a HUD role, whether or not it's in-house or not.
Right.
Right. Cooperative agreement.
Right. And in some cases, there's no debt or equity involved, and then so there's just the PBRA contract administrator who may well then be the place of resort for administering the reserves, if you will, or at least monitoring and overseeing how those would be administered. So, yes.
Yeah, maybe that might be added to the. Yeah, that might be added to the future ACCs. At this point, there isn't that requirement. So.
Okay, and Joe Schiff, you're on again.
I have a different question this time.
Okay.
That's good.
If a housing authority has $1 million in reserves, in order to convert to RAD, meaning do all the initial repairs, pay the soft costs, and fund the reserve for replacement, it's going to take $750,000. So they've got an extra $250,000. That money could go into enlarging the initial deposit for reserve for replacement. I'm assuming they could gratuitously increase it, right?
Yep. Absolutely.
But if they do that, then some entity will have to be asked for permission to expend that money. Could they set up a separate reserve, Pat, that would just be a property reserve but not a reserve for replacement, that they would have total control over?
All right, Counselor, I think you're poised for this question.
Yeah, 2 points. Yes, this is some advice I'd given earlier. Whenever you want to transfer operating reserves, to your converted project, and a lot of times you don't want to pour it straight into your Section 8 reserves. You want to keep it separate. So yes, we could entertain something like that. But second, I was getting a little worried when you started saying you were going to transfer like $750,000 of $1 million reserves. Just remember, you have to keep minimum reserves if you're still operating public housing.
Right, and a number, I know Joe's clients, a number of them will be moving all the way out of public housing, so that may be the root of the question.
Right. And
that's not root.
Okay, and certainly you would want to move it, because if you didn't move it, it would come back to HUD.
Right, that's a worst case scenario.
Yeah, that's a worst case, exactly.
I think you'll find that we've been accommodating on those of you that will be converting your portfolios out of the public housing program on how to sweep any remaining public housing funds as you go forward, and we'd urge you to take a look at what we've offered on replacement housing factor funds and some other things. There may be some isolated pockets of funding that we haven't thought about, but we'll be happy to take a look at that and figure that out. If you convert over to the Section 8 platform, we want you to go over there, take the resources that you have to succeed over there. That's the simple principle here.
Okay, thanks, Pat.
Okay, that looks like there's the last caller with a question, unless anyone else wants to raise their hand. Leanne, are there any more written comments or questions? Okay.
Well, it sounds like we will abide by people's schedule. We appreciate you taking the time, and so we'll wrap up 5 minutes. Will, you have any last thoughts for what we're going to be doing next week or future calls?
So we will be continuing these calls same time over the next few weeks. We have not decided yet on the topic for next week, but if there is some big pressing thing that that you want us to talk about, feel free to propose something. Otherwise, you might come up with something on our own, and we'll send out another RAD blast tomorrow or early next week with a link for registering and with the topic. There's and somebody else raised their hand.
Oh.
Millicent Davis.
Millicent, hello.
Yes. Hi. How are you? Sorry, I submitted a written question. I don't know, must not have worked, but I do just have a quick question. With regard to the PBRA scenario, does the requirement for the resident mobility to a housing choice voucher only affect the resident of the public housing development at the time of conversion or in perpetuity?
In perpetuity.
Okay.
You're basically entering into a PBRA contract with what we call a choice mobility component built into it. That's part of RAD. That's an integral part of RAD.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Okay. All right. I think we've covered everything, and again, next week, same time, different questions, different topics, but we find this a helpful way for us to respond to many questions that we get, so up to you to shape the questions, send us ideas, cover 10 minutes at the top on some common themes of interest to you. Send that suggestion to us at rad@hud.gov. We'll take a look at it, but this is the format that we know you voted for in the past, and we'll be available next week and look forward to it then.
Thanks all.
Thank you.